Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State explain how it was determined and who determined that Soldier F qualified for Ministry of Defense funding and what precedent this decision was based on, particularly given reports that he received double the financial support typically afforded to a single defendant if he was eligible for legal aid? That avenue was open for him. Instead, £4.3 million of public money was spent defending a man who, in his own evidence to the Southern Inquiry, admitted his lethal role in the state-sanctioned murders on Bloody Sunday. Does the Secretary of State believe that this represents an equal and impartial application of justice or a two-tiered system designed to shield the British state from accountability? Before we show you the full footage, do us a little favor by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. Costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much. On the first point that she raises, it is right and proper that the Ministry of Defense provides support to any veteran who is facing a criminal justice process. I think we would expect nothing less. This week, the Commons proper went ballistic, and the moment that lit the fuse was raw, shocking, and utterly theatrical. A female Muslim MP stood up, launched into a blistering attack on British Army veterans, and was met with boos that echoed around the chamber like thunder. I'm not exaggerating when I say the whole place felt like it was about to boil over. MPs snapping at each other, cameras cutting from face to face, the Speaker trying to restore order while the gallery buzzed with whispers. It all happened hours ago, and the clip is already everywhere, stitched into short reels, captioned and shared, played on breakfast shows and live streamed into hundreds of WhatsApp groups. The line that set it off was blunt. She accused the state of shielding certain ex-service personnel, while others suffered. She questioned ministry decisions on legal funding for veterans accused of wrongdoing decades ago, and she framed it as a matter of justice and accountability. The tone of her speech was fierce, legalistic, and uncompromising, but the reaction, immediate and visceral, a chorus of boos and jeers from MPs and observers that transformed a legal debate into a raw cultural moment. To be precise about who's who, the chamber's drama involved several key players. The Muslim MP who spoke was female. She spoke in a hard, precise way, citing numbers and naming what she called systemic inequality. Opposing her, the Secretary of State, also a woman, responded on behalf of the government, asserting that the Ministry of Defense has a duty of support to veterans facing criminal proceedings, and that certain decisions were made in the context of legal advice and national interest. The Speaker, a man wearing the uncomfortable calm of someone who's seen this kind of thing before, called for order, but the noise would not be quelled. And in the middle of it all were the veterans, largely men, many in their 60s and 70s, whose names and reputations were being debated not just as historical footnotes but as live, painful issues affecting families, pensions, and sense of national honor. The gendered pronouns are important here, because the exchange was not abstract. It was a woman challenging a group of veteran men standing in for institutions and histories, and the chamber responded with a mixture of anger, loyalty, and genuine hurt. It's worth unpacking why this hit the way it did. On one level, the MP's speech was a legal and moral interrogation. She asked loudly and pointedly why public money had been used to defend certain veterans in ways that she argued looked uneven. She referred to a specific case where millions in state funding had reportedly been spent on legal defense for an ex-soldier, implicated in Bloody Sunday-era killings, and contrasted that with the thin support available to other defendants. She asked whether the government's actions risked creating a two-tier justice system when the public expects equality before the law. Those were sharp, mysterious questions, are the kind of questions parliamentary committees are designed to ask. But the heat came because the subject was not an abstract policy paper. It was about the very people who fought for the country, whose service is held sacred by many and whose treatment now touches raw memories and grief. That emotional contrast is what made the Commons boil. Ordinary people watching at home felt the fight in a very particular way. On one side were veterans and their families, communities, who rightly expect respect and support after decades of service. People who point to the dangerous days and nights they endured to keep the public safe. On the other side were victims, families, activists, and ordinary citizens, demanding accountability for past abuses. The MP's speech asked whether the state's instincts to support veterans had overpowered a clear-eyed pursuit of justice. That question, whether fair or inflammatory, is heavy with emotion, pride in service colliding with the demand for truth. No wonder MPs booed. No wonder veterans felt wounded. No wonder the chamber erupted into shouting and cries of order. Politically, the fallout was immediate and savage. Opposition benches, particularly those who pride themselves on law and order posturing, pounced. Within minutes, they framed the MP's comments as an attack not on policy but on people who served under terrible conditions. Headline writers had a field day. Veterans booed in Commons. MP attacks soldiers. Chaos ensues. Parliament in flames over historic cases. Social media was brutal. Clips of the boos were looped with dramatic scores. Right-leaning commentators described the MP's approach as divisive. Left-leaning voices insisted she was asking necessary questions about accountability and misuse of funds. Veterans organizations released statements expressing hurt and anger, some demanding apologies, others asking for calm and due process. Meanwhile, human rights groups and victims' families doubled down. They said asking hard questions about state conduct is the only route to reconciliation, and that money spent on legal defense for those accused of serious crimes cannot be beyond scrutiny. The international angle added another layer. Overseas outlets picked up the spectacle within hours. European dailies framed it as a test of British institutions. Can a society honor its troops while still holding them to account? International human rights bodies who have watched similar reckonings in other countries published cautious analyses, noting that democracies must be brave enough to investigate state wrongdoing. That global attention matters because Britain's reputation for rule of law and fair institutions is part of its soft power. Embassies quietly watched and made notes, and sometimes that quiet watchfulness trickles back into diplomatic conversations. Allies asking pointed questions in private underscore that the stakes are higher than political theater. They touch legitimacy and moral authority. Back home, the scene was raw and human. Community centers, local pubs, veterans clubs are the places where ordinary citizens gather became echo chambers for the fallout. One ex-private who'd served in Northern Ireland called a local radio show and said, voice-breaking, they served us. They deserve respect, not this public pillory. A woman whose brother was killed decades ago called into another station and asked why the truth had been slow and why families still felt denied. Counselors reported a wave of emails, some supporting the MP's demands for scrutiny, others demanding protection and apologies for soldiers. That kind of grassroots churn is political dynamite. It's not simply Westminster noise, its communities, sorting their grief and anger. The narrative's climactic moment came during the committee hearing when the Secretary of State calmly and with deliberate measuredness said something that tried to square this impossible circle. Yes, the Ministry of Defense supports veterans facing criminal proceedings because of a duty of care and the complexity of military service. But equally, the government believes in equal justice and has procedures to review funding decisions. She stressed that decisions were not made to shield wrongdoing but to ensure that those who risk their lives in service receive appropriate legal support while investigations proceed. That reply, though measured, did not calm the chamber. The Muslim MP returned to the dispatch box and with visible intensity pressed harder. Who determined funding levels, what legal advice supported the choices, and whether the public interest had been properly weighed? She demanded figures, memos, minutes, documents that might show whether there had been a political influence at work. And that was the pivot, the demand for documents, and the suggestion of political interference turned this into more than a moral argument. It became a procedural assault, the kind of parliamentary work that can lead to inquiries, reports, and perhaps even prosecutions. The veterans groups bristled. The MOD promised to cooperate, and the media devoured every tentative lead. For weeks now, the story has had a life of its own. Op-eds debating the balance between support and accountability, historic analyses of Bloody Sunday and other incidents, and interviews with lawyers about how state-funded legal defense can be justified or criticized. What happens next matters. If the government publishes the documents and they show clear why impartial decision-making, decisions grounded in legal advice and not political protection, the MP's attack may be seen as overreach. If the documents reveal ambiguity, ad hoc choices, or poor record-keeping, the chamber may return with calls for independent inquiries and possibly compensation claims. The worst outcome for ministers would be a finding that political considerations overrode due process. That would not just be embarrassing, it would be a full constitutional crisis over trust in civil and military institutions. The human stakes can't be overstated for the veterans who watch this unfold. Deeply personal. These are men and women who, in many cases, have carried trauma and injuries for decades. Public censure feels like a fresh wound. For victims and their families, it's a demand for truth after years of silence. But sometimes for a lifetime. For the country, it's a test of whether national pride and justice can be reconciled without one being sacrificed for the other. So here's the dramatic closing summary. Parliament erupted because a female Muslim MP asked tough and compromising questions about state-funded legal defense for veterans. Questions that cut to the heart of justice, memory, and national honor. The chamber's boos showed how volatile and emotional the subject is. One community's need for support collided with another's need for accountability. The political fallout has already begun. Media storms, committee demands, veteran statements, and international scrutiny, and all of it will force a reckoning about transparency in the handling of historic allegations. Will the government resist calls for a full, independent review and risk further outrage? Or will it open the records, accept scrutiny, and allow the rule of law to do its work, even if that path is messy, painful, and politically costly? What do you think? Was the MP right to press for transparency even if it upset veterans and families? Or was the tone and timing of her attack unfair and Incendiary, a needless wound to people who served. Should the Ministry of Defense publish all documents related to legal funding decisions to clear the air, or would that risk compromising ongoing investigations and traumatizing families? Further, drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone who cares about justice and history, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, because this story is far from over, and the answers will shape how Britain deals with its past for years to